This powerful media baron is himself media shy and declined to take part in tonight's Four Corners, the story of building the Murdoch dynasty.
He's the ultimate pragmatist. You know, if he has to be a Democrat, he's a Democrat. If he has to be a Republican, he's a Republican. If he has to be an Australian, he's an Australian. If he has to be an American, he's an American. The ultimate pragmatist.
Good evening. Welcome to the program. Rupert Murdoch's come a very long way since the days when he was dubbed the Dirty Digger. His wealth, prestige and influence have expanded alongside his global media empire, as have his ambitions. He aims to make News Corporation the largest supplier of news and entertainment in the world, and he's getting there fast. Already, his television channels beam into 1/3 of the homes in the world, and as he told his news executives at last year's annual general meeting, the expectation is to double that. But Rupert's not just thinking about money and power. Now in his mid-60s, he's thinking about succession. Who will control the empire when he goes? Rupert Murdoch's a family man, and he wants the Murdoch dynasty to pass to his children. But which one? Ali Cromie reports.
Secret preparations had been underway all year, every detail planned with military precision. It would be the exclusive party of the decade in the exotic Whitsundays. The remote location ensured utmost privacy. The elite participants, the utmost prestige. The guest list was guarded like a state secret. From around the globe, Rupert Murdoch had corralled his lieutenants. They're his executives from his creation, the News Corporation. The ones who write his newspapers, broadcast his television and run his movie studios. Whereabouts are you from in the News
I'm from Los Angeles.
What
I'm
part
from
of the
Fox.
business? From Fox Television?
No,
or?
from the 20th Century Fox.
Simon's a star.
Right. The film side of things.
Yes.
I'm from the Times of London.
I work at Fox Television, and it's just a great opportunity to see all that Rupert has put together. It's really extraordinary.
Well, this is the most exciting media company in the world, bar none.
Have you met Mr. Murdoch before?
Oh, sure, yeah.
What sort of boss is Rupert Murdoch?
Terrific.
Why is he terrific?
Charming and bright, very helpful, very supportive.
What sort of boss is Rupert Murdoch?
He's a nice guy.
And what sort of boss is Rupert Murdoch?
He's terrific. He's a visionary. I mean, he's really he's a rarity in today's world. To have somebody who is that entrepreneurial and that brilliant and that globally oriented, I think is pretty extraordinary.
If you scored an invitation to his multi-million-dollar bash on exclusive Hayman Island, you're someone important in the world of Murdoch. Not that anyone is important compared to Rupert.
Well, no doubt technically, professionally, they're very good, but I tend to take the view that in the news organisation, there's only one manager, that's Rupert Murdoch, and all the rest are messengers. There are senior messengers and there are junior messengers, but they're messengers.
Joining Rupert's men at the behest of the powerful one was the Prime Minister of Australia, in holiday mode, and the would-be Prime Minister of Britain, with his sleeves rolled up. Rupert has a special talent for pulling in politicians to his private party.
We have media in 3 continents, and Labor leaders like to proselytise about the things they're doing.
So
we're proud of what we're doing.
So has the Labor government become too pally with Rupert Murdoch?
Welcome aboard, Sun Goddess.
Hi.
An angry Keating later complained about our unexpected greeting on his arrival in the Whitsundays. And his friend Rupert ticked me off about this too. Do you expect Mr. Rupert Murdoch's papers to support you in the upcoming election?
No, I mean, I've made it clear right from the very start. I'm not here to trade policy for editorial support. What Mr. Murdoch's papers do is up to him. What the Labour Party does is up to us.
Rupert arrived in style, his Gulfstream jet worthy of a king. On this immensely important day, Rupert was not alone. His eldest son Lachlan arrived hand in hand with his American fiancée. Rupert's second son James, holding his niece's baby seat, is on summer break from Harvard University. Finally, Rupert Murdoch arrives, looking every bit his 64 years. Behind Rupert, his wife Anna and his daughter Elizabeth, carrying her young child. These people, the future of the News Corporation. Hello, Mr. Murdoch.
Hello again, how are you?
What's going to happen to News Corporation when you die, Mr. Murdoch?
You're a lot better.
Rupert may joke about who will succeed him, but it's no laughing matter. Rupert wants one of his children to take his place one day. He has put into motion a plan to help achieve this. The Murdoch dynasty is set to go well into the next century. So Rupert Murdoch's an empire builder?
Yes, of course it's an empire. He's a great imperialist.
What sort of empire does he want to create? What's his vision for his empire?
He wants to create the most important and the biggest company dealing in the most important commodity in the world today, which is information. The railroad barons made the 19th century, and the information barons are making the end of the 20th and the early 21st century. And Murdoch is one of the most important information barons in the world.
That may be, but he's not about to share his vision with you and me. For 4 days, Hayman Island became Fortress Hayman. This boat was dispatched to chase us away. Even helicopters were banned from flying over his fortress. Not a single word about Murdoch's media strategies for the next century leaked out. Today, Rupert Murdoch's empire stretches around the world, from Australia to Asia and Europe, and across to the Americas. But he's no longer just a prince of print. Today he is a multimedia baron, his empire a $23 billion company.
News Corporation, the English-speaking world's largest and finest network of news, information and entertainment, has a firm, strong vision of television's future. Perfectly placed when television is set to soar.
Rupert's father, Sir Keith, would be immensely proud of his son if he could see him today. Sir Keith was a great newspaperman himself, but he was primarily a manager. Sir Keith passed on to his son his passionate belief that complete control was the key to wealth and success. And Rupert, all his life, has been driven by his determination not to be a manager, but an owner.
My father left me 70,000 £1 shares in a family company, and that family company had 50% of News Limited then.
That family company was Cruden Investments, named after the family home near Frankston, Victoria. Rupert would have to share control of Cruden with his 3 sisters, Helen, Janet and Anne, as well as his mother.
Right from the start, after Sir Keith's death, Rupert used to have annual board meetings round the school table at Cruden Farm, and they would discuss everything. Rupert would tell them what he was planning to do. They'd criticise or otherwise. I don't think they still have the board meetings round the school table, but it's still very close.
We are, I think it's fair to say, an exceptionally close family. We're all very fond of each other and very close in every way to each other.
Who made the early business decisions about Cruden?
Well, it was left to Dame Elizabeth after Sir Keith died. She was faced with a fairly considerable debt, overdrafts, mortgages, including a mortgage on Cruden Farm. And it was her decision that she was going to pay all the debts off.
Rupert at that stage, as a young man fresh out of university after his father's death, wanted to keep the newspapers, but Dame Elizabeth insisted on shedding even most of those. He was left virtually with one newspaper to build this remarkable empire out of.
And build Rupert did. Forever the hands-on boss, not only did he revitalise the news in Adelaide, but he shook up Perth and Sydney. Conservative London was horrified with his raunchy son and news of the world. Savvy New York sometimes gasped at the Post. But sex, scandal, murder and mayhem sells, makes money. Rupert ploughed it into building his creation, the News Corporation. For a long time, little went back into Cruden.
You have to remember, in 1979, the family's shareholding in News was only worth about $20 million there. Now, in the next 7 years, there was an explosion of wealth there, after which the family's shareholding went from about $20 million to about $2 billion.
Emboldened by success, in 1986 Murdoch returned to Melbourne to make one of the largest takeovers in Australian corporate history. For $2.2 billion, he would buy the newspaper group his father had done so much to build, yet had been denied its ownership.
I thought it was an amazing price and a great bonus for every Herald and Weekly Times shareholder that was then living. The $2 and a bit billion that Murdoch paid for Herald and Weekly Times represented over 40 times earnings. Now that's a big price to pay.
While Rupert had reclaimed the family jewels in Melbourne, there were more in Brisbane. Queensland Press, publisher of the Courier Mail, once was controlled by Rupert's father. His son seized the opportunity to return it to the Murdoch fold.
Yeah, it was a bit dramatic. Queensland Press were having a board meeting on, I think it was a Friday afternoon, I recall it, and suddenly there was a phone call from downstairs to say that Rupert was on the place, and he came up and said, "I've got an offer that you guys can't refuse."
In early 1987, Murdoch had his family company Cruden fined $590 million to buy control of Queensland Press. But soon Cruden had trouble meeting its borrowings, so a remarkable proposition was put to the board of Queensland Press. For $670 million, Queensland Press would buy a large chunk of Cruden shares in the News Corporation. To some, it looked like Queensland Press's money was being used to pay for its own takeover.
The Queensland Press Board were approached with the idea that they purchased from Cruden something like $600 million worth of News Limited shares, which it was obvious to everyone would relieve the debt that Cruden was handling. I can remember being pretty concerned about it because although the market price was $10 a share, the offer from Cruden was to sell at $16. That concern was probably alleviated because it was presented to us was presented to the board that there was an option already in existence at that price. Now, that was the first I knew about that.
A full 3 years after the event, the Australian Securities Commission investigated the deal, yet no witnesses were called. Did you consider the inquiry into the transaction a serious inquiry?
No, I didn't. At that stage, I thought, one, it was too far back in history, and also I think at that stage there was enough evidence to show that the investment by Queensland Press had been tremendously successful, that the share price of those News Limited shares had increased quite a deal.
Murdoch's lawyers scoffed at the investigation, saying, "The simple review of documents by an investigator is typically an inadequate basis for coming to even preliminary conclusions. The Australian Securities Commission found no wrongdoing." Who primarily benefited from that sale?
Oh, I think the only people that benefited were the family members of Cruden Investments.
Just last year, Cruden reaped yet another financial benefit from its newspaper business in Queensland. The News Corporation had spent $271 million building a state-of-the-art printing plant at Murray in Brisbane. They then sold it to the Murdoch-controlled family company Queensland Press for exactly the same amount, $271 million.
I think that had that transaction been with an entirely unrelated party, they could have got more for the printing press. It would have been very difficult for a independent company in Australia, for example, to have got that price for the printing equipment from Mannesmann and to have paid cost plus interest. I suspect they got a good deal.
So Rupert was getting a bargain for his family?
Queensland Press got a bargain, and Queensland Press is majority owned by the Cruden Company.
During the late 80s, Rupert Murdoch's empire reached for the stars. In Britain, he'd launched Sky Television, a visionary venture, but one that soaked up more than $1 billion by 1990.
As the technology revolution gathers pace, so too the television revolution. A new world of television, literally just around the corner, an unimagined range of entertainment.
In the United States, Murdoch had paid an extraordinary $3 billion for the publisher of TV Guide.
Totally in control.
In his effort to be master of the information universe, Rupert Murdoch had accumulated a debt of $7.5 billion. His News Corporation and family company, Cruden, were in peril.
He bought too much. He borrowed too much, and he bought too much. Murdoch is unstoppable. He never stops. He goes on and on and on. And through the 80s, he acquired and acquired and acquired through the spending splurge of the 80s. And it all went very, very well until the recession at the end of the 80s and early 90s. And at the end of 89, 90, the company was on the precipice. There was too much debt, and he wasn't able to service it. The whole thing had to be rescheduled.
Ensconced in the financial heart of his empire, in the Avenue of the Americas in New York, Rupert hatched a plan to save the News Corporation. He had to convince 146 different banks to give him time to repay his debt. Rupert's fight reached a climax one night in December 1990.
There was one debt of many dozens of debts that had to be rolled over that night. It was a tiny debt. It was 10 million Australian dollars taken out by the Pittsburgh National Bank, which was part of a larger facility. And Murdoch didn't know the Pittsburgh National Bank, and the Pittsburgh National Bank didn't know Murdoch. He had to have that debt rolled over. And there were problems in Pittsburgh. They didn't want to do it. They wanted their money back.
Rupert Murdoch would have to beg the chairman of Pittsburgh Bank to save his empire.
So he called the bank, and to his astonishment, the chairman refused to take the call. He wouldn't talk to Murdoch. Here's Murdoch, who was a friend of prime ministers, presidents, and so on, and the chairman of some tiny little bank in Pittsburgh wouldn't talk to him. But instead, the chief loan officer of the bank, who had previously said to Murdoch's chief financial officer, "No way, we won't recycle this loan, we won't roll it over," came on the phone and said, "I've talked to your man, Dave, and we had a very good conversation, and we've decided we won't be difficult. We'll let you have the money after all."
One of the comments that Mr. Murdoch made frequently as the debt crisis was coming to an end was "never again." And this may have been misunderstood. As I understand it, he means I will never let my company be controlled by other people. And his experience of the debt crisis was that his company was controlled by bankers, and some of them rather small and uninteresting or silly little bankers, and he doesn't want that to happen again.
Rupert's brush with financial death had brought home to him that the time had come to take total control of the House of Murdoch. Cruden Farm has always been the hearth of the Murdoch family. The tall lemon gums lining the graceful driveway have grown with 4 generations of the Murdoch family. Rupert's mother, now in her 80s, while feisty is frail. Murdoch was well aware that his extended family, though still close and affectionate, could one day compete for the spoils of his empire.
I think it gets back to the old Scottish ideal that the eldest son takes over the empire and runs it. And I'm sure that by now Rupert wants his son to take charge of the operation. Or perhaps it's his daughter, I don't know.
So this was the day that the book was launched?
That was the day the book was launched.
Rupert decided to buy out his extended family. Rupert's 3 sisters, Helen, Janet and Anne and their families, would slowly sell their entitlement to shares in the News Corporation to Rupert's family.
Cruden is a company essentially owned by trusts or beneficiaries of trusts, and there's a whole series of these, the overwhelming majority of which, 2/3 or so, are of the immediate family. But there are others where the families are maybe now moving into second and third generations, where there's a sort of serious danger that you could get fragmentation. To avoid the kind of soap opera style corporate battles that one sees occasionally on television, maybe he'd be very keen to see that fragmentation limited by buying back in some of these trust beneficiaries.
A year ago, Rupert said his ownership of Cruden was around 60%. It will keep rising as the family buyout rolls on. Rupert is cutting his extended family adrift, but certainly in style. Rupert's sister Janet Calvert-Jones and her husband John last year paid $4 million for this classic clifftop house Harradine at Portsea in Victoria. His eldest sister Helen Hanbury and her family bought the historic Collinsville Merino stud in South Australia. It is one of several rural properties they have purchased in the last 3 years for a total cost of more than $15 million. This gracious country homestead Dreamthorpe at Mount Macedon in Victoria was snapped up by Rupert's nephew Paul Hanbury for $1.25 million. And in exclusive Toorak, another nephew, Mark Calvert-Jones, is renovating his new $1 million Melbourne home. Poised on Point Piper, overlooking magnificent Sydney Harbour, nephew Matt Hanbury bought Altona a few years ago for more than $5 million. He's demolished half the house and is spending another $1 million or so renovating. Altogether, Rupert's sisters and their families have spent more than $30 million on their property spree in the last few years. While Rupert's sisters have done well, Rupert has done even better.
I estimate that he's probably paying them about $600 million there for something which is probably worth about $2.5 billion now. So it was one of the best investments that he's made there.
Rupert, his wife and children are now firmly in control of the family company Cruden. But he's also had to shore up Cruden's control of the News Corporation. Because of the debt crisis, this has been on the slide. Rupert now wants to rebuild that family holding. He's created some ingenious schemes to do this. Firstly, he tried to issue super shares, but there was an outcry against them.
I think the most important reason was that it would have consolidated control of News Corp in the hands of the Murdoch family. And potentially, it could have led to a $1 billion wealth transfer to the Murdoch family at the expense of other shareholders in the company.
But Rupert doesn't give up easily. He had Plan B, non-voting shares.
Medium term, the market is quite right to suspect that these shares play a key role in either funding acquisitions without dilution or in enabling the family to realise some of its investment in News Corporation without losing any of its voting control, i.e. they could sell some of their limited voting shares.
I believe that Mr. Murdoch's objective is to give himself flexibility over the next few years to achieve what his basic plans are, and that is to retain and consolidate control of the company in the hands of his family, and if his children prove to be the sort of managers that Murdoch would like them to be, then he'll be able to ensure that management of the company goes to his children.
Los Angeles, the glamour showbiz capital.
I went down to the meat rack tavern, and I found myself a big old healthy girl. Now she was drinking alone. Oh, what a waste of sin.
Rodeo Drive, the place to cruise, linger over lunch, flaunt your wealth. America. This is where 70% of the revenue of the News Corporation is made. Hollywood, movie capital of the world. Home of Rupert Murdoch, movie mogul, television tycoon. Rupert Murdoch got into the risky Hollywood film business back in 1985. He paid more than $500 million for cash-strapped 20th Century Fox. Around the same time, he embarked on an even more daring and costly project than the movie business. He would build a new television network and take on America's big three establishment networks.
Hi folks, John Mellicar. This morning we're coming to you live on Hollywood Boulevard, where tonight they're going to have a major block party sponsored by LAPD and the LA Fire Department. It's going to be great. They're going to show us, look at it, jeez, man. Out of the street, please. Sorry. All right, well, it's going to be a good day, LA.
I think he came to realize that for the international expansion he wanted, and he had a global vision of an integrated film, television, entertainment business around the world, that the thing that opens doors is great programming. And so he needed a constant source of very strong programming, which he then could use to drive private television networks, win franchises from governments, as a calling card to start new businesses around the world. And I think that Fox served that agenda for him.
Murdoch didn't let US laws get in the way of his dream to own a television network. He proved yet again his mastery at overcoming regulatory hurdles.
He's the ultimate pragmatist. You know, if he has to be a Democrat, he's a Democrat. If he has to be a Republican, he's a Republican. If he has to be an Australian, he's an Australian. If he has to be an American, he's an American. The ultimate pragmatist.
Would you be kind enough to stop for a moment? Maybe we'll give us 3 or 4 questions.
From Canberra via London to Washington, Rupert has learned how to court those who matter. Among the people who really count is Reed Hundt, chairman of the US Federal Communications Commission. When did you first meet Rupert Murdoch, and what was your first impression of him?
Very affable, a gentleman, easy to talk to, and the meeting was January of '94, if I recall correctly, soon after I got this job.
Have you had any private meetings with Mr. Murdoch?
Well, that particular meeting was dinner at his house, so I guess you would call it a personal meeting.
For the last year, Rupert has been face-to-face against Reed Hundt, fighting to save his Fox network. Murdoch was accused of hiding the fact that ownership of Fox Television was Australian. He risked losing control of Fox. But the FCC made an exception for Rupert, gave him a public interest waiver, and Fox remains Rupert's. Isn't the Fox decision just another example of Rupert Murdoch being a master of getting around the laws?
Well, actually, I'm sorry that you would even think of asking the question that way. It is a mastering of nothing in terms of manipulation. It is the presentation of facts. We made our decision based on facts. Now, I don't know anything about any other regulators worldwide, but I know about this regulator. We invested this case very, very thoroughly. We turned over all of the rocks. We studied all of the
Shortly after this, the FCC chairman terminated our interview, objecting to our questions about the Murdoch inquiry. With the regulators off his back, Rupert can once again relax in his $7 million home in Los Angeles. From the top of the mountain, he can look forward to the future of his empire. It could go 2 ways. If Rupert finds a family member able to take over, the dynasty goes on. If not, pragmatic Rupert has another option. Murdoch in May announced an alliance with American long-distance telephone company MCI. As part of the deal, News Corporation would get $2 billion in cash and access to MCI's phone network. MCI would take a joyride with Rupert, and it could ultimately own 20% of News.
The alliance does a lot of things for Rupert Murdoch and News Corp. First of all, it gives him a ton of money. I mean, that's, bottom line for Murdoch, that's what he gets. He gets $2 billion and in a sense, doesn't give up very much control or anything like that. So that's, it's a sweet deal for him. It really is.
Quite separate and additional. The $2 billion is to sort of seal the alliance. Then going forward, it's what we'll do together on a 50-50 basis.
There is a fascinating aspect to the deal. MCI has first option to buy Murdoch's family stake in News, if the family ever sells.
I think that is MCI's way of getting a hold of ownership of the content at some point in the future if it sees it as a strategic necessity. But that also means that, the Murdoch family would have to at some point decide to sell, which I think is an open issue.
So does it mean anything that Rupert's given these preemptive rights to MCI?
If it means nothing until the point at which the Murdoch family decides to sell.
Today, every indication is that Rupert would like his children, Elizabeth, Lachlan or James, to succeed him. Daughter Elizabeth has chosen small-town California as her own media launch pad.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Eve Cherry Show. It's a beautiful, warm afternoon here in San Luis Obispo, and I'm pleased to welcome as my guest today Elizabeth Murdoch. And Elizabeth Murdoch is the owner of the KSBY television station and the sister station, which is KSBW.
In many ways, it's fabulous because I've always come from a family with shared work interests, and we've always talked business around the table, and I've loved listening to my parents talk about business.
Just last year, Liz Murdoch came to sleepy San Luis Obispo. Armed with a $35 million guarantee from her father, Liz and her husband bought this San Luis Obispo station, and another, further north in Salinas. Immediately, in a style reminiscent of her father, she turned her newly acquired TV station upside down.
Well, she came to KSBY, and the very first thing she said is, I'm not going to make any changes. And we knew right away she was going to make changes, because she says she's not going to. What does she do? She makes changes. The sad part was the changes that she made. She started firing people who had been in this community for a number of years. I'm thinking Madeline Palashevsky, who was the director of community relations. Nice woman, never controversial. She just is supposed to go out and work with nonprofit groups. Been at the station 13 years. She gets fired, and she gets fired the day her father dies. And I would say a year later, half of the employees there are new. They've all come in the last year. All the managers are new. It was just body bags coming out of the TV station, because she had to prove how tough she was. She had to prove that she was going to be the boss, and this is how she chose to make her statement. The memory of love's regret.
Not everyone loathes the new direction Liz Murdoch has taken her TV stations. At her second television station in Salinas, young presenters and fresh emphasis on news programming has won approval. Ratings are up.
What happens when you send a rooster through a car wash? Well, they become awfully quiet, that's what happens.
I think that she has a very tough act to follow in her father. She has to prove herself to him, and I think she wants to go as far as she possibly can. Don't write her off. She's a very bright, articulate woman. She is bound to be very successful.
She said that she sees these stations as a stepping stone to something bigger. She really didn't specify what, but it's clear that she has greater ambitions than just running these two stations in California.
Welcome back to the Eve Cherry Show. Now, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 2 younger brothers, and I have an older half-sister who's older than me by 10 years. And my youngest, James, is the 22-year-old, and he has just started his own record company and is a very good graphic artist. The middle of us, Lachlan, who's 24, is in Australia right now, working in newspapers.
This is Lachlan Murdoch's alma mater on the other side of America. Princeton University, an Ivy League college among America's finest. Lachlan graduated from here last year, majoring in philosophy. It was an unexpected choice for the son of one of the world's great media entrepreneurs.
We read some Jean-Paul Sartre, we read some Ludwig Wittgenstein and some other contemporary philosophers.
My impression is that he was interested essentially in moral questions, in ethics, what kind of life one should lead, what is right and wrong, how do you define right and wrong. These are the questions that he was most interested in.
Okay, Captain.
Lachlan tested himself at the wall. This is where he wanted to spend every waking moment, to the great detriment of his studies. Rock climbing was Lachlan's passion.
I just kind of strolled by one day and he was sort of the handsome guy in charge, so he came over and asked me if I wanted to climb, and I said, well, maybe. I didn't know who he was until after he graduated several years later. He just seemed like kind of a nice, sort of quiet guy. I knew that he was really, really smart, a really good climber, but he didn't act like the kind of person that was, you know, extremely famous.
After Lachlan graduated from Princeton, Rupert sent him to Brisbane, home of the family company icon Queensland Press.
I'm very pleased about it, but it'll be a test.
My father's remarkable in what he's achieved. I think I'll work as hard as I can to do as much as I can, and I'll take one challenge at a time.
There seems to be a lot of focus on who will be Rupert Murdoch's successor. Do you think that could be you of the 4 children?
Oh, I can't think that far ahead. I'll work on Queensland and do the best job I can in Brisbane.
What was the reaction of the staff to the arrival of Lachlan?
Scepticism, I think. People being unclear about whether he was there to actually make decisions and make changes, or whether he was there really to be the eyes and ears for his father.
Rupert sent Lachlan into the punch-up against the Packers over television rights for rugby league. Lachlan, general manager of Queensland Press, told the Super League story to the Courier Mail as part of a profile about him. But at the last minute, senior management of News pulled publication of the story. Lachlan is in line to run Rupert's Australian operations. He recently moved to News headquarters in Sydney.
If you look at the way in which the children are operating at the moment, you can see that Lachlan is clearly being fast-tracked through the businesses. He's on the board of Star, the publisher of the Australian, and he's moved quite quickly from a position, therefore, in an associated company, Queensland Press. So at the moment, he seems to be streaking ahead almost.
So you expect that Lachlan will succeed Rupert Murdoch?
I would think so. If, I think you'll have a long apprenticeship under Rupert, and who is very fit and healthy at the moment. And after that, I suppose he'll take over everything, yes.
What do you think of Rupert's plans to install one of his children to run his empire?
I think it's a rather odd decision for someone who tends to argue against aristocracy and inherited titles and privilege. I think it's a very odd decision to install his son in such an elevated position with lack of experience and at such a tender age. It's paradoxical that Rupert should act like an hereditary peer.
From the sunburnt country to the land of wealth and opportunity, Rupert Murdoch is now firmly ensconced in America. He spends weekends at this sprawling cattle ranch in Carmel Valley in California, bought last year for $12 million US. Rupert Murdoch has eclipsed his father's ambitions for him. He is buying out his relatives, and he has prepared the groundwork for the next generation of Murdochs. The Australian Murdoch dynasty is now an American dynasty. Just over the hills from Rupert's ranch is the legacy of another media baron, San Simeon, the folly built by the American newspaper man William Randolph Hearst. His flamboyant and salacious style changed forever the course of American journalism. He made millions, but he spent millions. Rupert Murdoch may leave no San Simeon, but he has built an information and entertainment empire that spans the globe. But the building of the empire may be easier than continuing the family dynasty.
I can't believe one family can produce two Rupert Murdochs.
So it's not possible to replicate another Rupert?
I can't believe it's possible to replicate Rupert.
Rupert Murdoch, empire builder, dynasty builder. It's now up to his daughter Elizabeth, or one of his sons, to rise up and one day take the reins of his creation.
Ali Cromie reporting. We approached Murdoch's family to participate in tonight's program, but they all declined as one. His mother Elizabeth wrote to us with this explanation. I'm very sorry that I'm unable to help you. Rupert is quite adamant on his decision that the family should not give you any help. And that was that. Until next week, good night.